All right. Welcome, folks, to our February TMN Tuesday, part of our monthly webinar series where we have some amazing speakers and we have one of the best for us today. Before we get into our content for today's webinar, we're going to go through our virtual meeting room etiquette as we always do. If you are an old hat at the TMN Tuesdays, this is repetitive, but we do like to say it every time just so that our new Master Naturalists that are joining the program, joining the training, or even members of the public who are watching our TMN Tuesdays are aware of our standards here. We do have a WebEx help guide if you are having issues getting into our programs. As WebEx does have regular updates, please check that help guide on our website. For today's interaction with our speaker, we will have a chat room. That chat function is open for on-topic discussion only. Please be respectful and professional in all comments or questions. Help our chat moderators, Michelle and Hannah and myself, with your best grammar, best spelling, and avoid acronyms so that we can ask the questions that you intend to be asked of our speaker today as we moderate those to Ms. Tania. Today's presentation will run right at an hour, and the recording, either watching the recording or watching live today, will count for an advanced training hour as a Master Naturalist. Please work with your local VMS director to get that recorded appropriately. And then again, last but not least, if you're new here, you're not able to unmute, your system's not broken, you're not able to share your screen, that is to give the full amount of attention possible to Tania so that she can tell us everything there is to know about our topic today.
And if you're able and willing to take our little survey, this survey helps us to remain eligible for funding for the program and offering events like this to you in the future. You can hover over the QR code there, or let's see, we may drop the link into the chat for you as well. But it's a voluntary survey for you to take if you're willing. And if it asks you where you're viewing from, just put the county where you are viewing from today. Thank you.
I'll do this one too. I'll do this one. As has become a program staple in the spring, we have hosted a virtual volunteer fair now for the last 5 years. This is an opportunity for projects from around the state to find Master Naturalist volunteers that are willing and interested in participating in virtual and distance-based volunteer projects. This will be our April TMN Tuesday, so tune in for that. Our request today, though, is to look for projects or project hosts that may want to submit their idea for a virtual volunteer project. There's lots of information on the website that you see on your screen. I'll be dropping that in the chat here in just a second. So please we encourage you to share that resource to your local conservation organizations that may be looking for more volunteers. Okay, and then one more date to put on your calendar before we get into the good stuff today. I keep promising the good stuff. But one more date is October 16th through 19th is our annual meeting for our 2025 year. We'll be in College Station, Texas. I will also drop the link for that website in the chat. We're just getting that started with our planning, but we'll have a lot more information in the months to come. And we really hope that you are saving that date to join us there in College Station, Texas in October. Oh gosh, there's one more thing. We're just so busy. I keep forgetting about all the other things that we were going to talk about with you guys today. We just finished launching our first year of our Pollinators for Texas project, awarding 15 chapters with some great project award finances sponsored by HEB. Our Texas Our Future program. So please, if you are a chapter awardee, congratulations first. But also check out the news article that went out on our website and has gone out into other news releases throughout the state, congratulating you on your project award. And if you're in a project that's interested in looking for this opportunity in the future, please check those projects out. There's some wonderful work being done across the state by our Master Naturalist chapters. Okay, no, really, now I'm done. Michelle, you want to introduce Tania?
Yes, our speaker today, I'd like to welcome back Tania Homayoun. Many of you, she's no stranger to our Master Naturalist program. Many of you have Tania come speak to your local chapters about ornithology and other topics. Tania is our state ornithologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife, and she's also one of our chapter advisors with the Balcones Canyonlands chapter. Tania had the honors of announcing our 2025 recertification pin at our annual meeting in October, which is when we always debut the next year's certification pin. And so Tania is back today to talk. She has an expanded presentation, and she's going to tell us more about our 2025 recertification pin, which is the likeness of the Greater Roadrunner. So Tania, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining me on this rainy afternoon. I guess it's technically now afternoon. Let's get us set up here. Right. So I would just like to, oops. There we go. All right. Now, can y'all just see just the slide and not all
Yes, ma'am.
behind it? Perfect. And then there's one more thing I need to open up. Scoot that over here. All right. And I think now I am ready to go. So thank you guys for showing up for the Greater Roadrunner. This is the pin writ large. So if you haven't got your hours yet, you have something to look forward to. So we are going to learn all about Geococcyx californianus, the Californian earth cuckoo. So I had a lot of fun pulling this PowerPoint together. It's just such a compelling species, and also this happened. So PowerPoint likes to suggest alt text for your images, and so it was no different when I loaded this image in here, and it suggested alt text was. Get it to go. There we go. A picture containing a weapon. Oh, well, we're going to see just how accurate that is as we get into this. So without further ado, let's meet the bird, the myth, the legend, Greater Roadrunner. But first, we're going to put our little friend here in some context. So the Roadrunner is one of a large group of birds in the order Cuculiformes in the family Cuculidae. So this includes cuckoos, roadrunners, and anis, all three of which we have represented in the state of Texas. Collectively, this group includes 147 species. They are found across a wide variety of different habitats, everything from forest to woodland, savanna, and arid scrubland habitats. And interestingly, one of the things that you may know about is that this family, Cuculidae, is kind of famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, for engaging in brood parasitism. So what makes a roadrunner a roadrunner? They are very iconic birds, and there's a few things that your brain is probably cueing in on when you look at them. So they have this very long tail relative to their body size. They have these long legs, and in some of these pictures, it's legs for days, especially the little freshly fledged birds that are just out of the nest. They're adorable. So another thing that's characteristic of cuckoos is that they have these, what we refer to as zygodactyl toes. So this is a term that refers to the way that the toes are arranged. So if we think of what we think of as a typical bird foot, and you ask maybe a first grader, draw me what a bird footprint looks like, they'll probably make 3 little lines going forward and 1 little line going back. And on a roadrunner, the zygodactyl arrangement means they have 2 toes pointing forward and 2 toes pointing backwards. And this is something that they share with parrots and with woodpeckers. They have this very robust decurved bill. It's kind of the Leatherman of the bird world. It's capable of doing just about everything. And one of the things that you often get to see is you see them out interacting in their environment. They have very expressive feathers. They'll move them and shift them in different ways. And what often happens when they do that is they expose this patch behind their eye that's called the post-orbital apteria, which just literally means the bare patch of skin behind the eye. They have got some pretty epic eyeshadow going on, if you will. They've got this very dramatic blue that fades into this white, that fades into this orangey red. And as I said, they tend to do a lot of expressive movement with these feathers. The tail flips around a lot, and they have this crest that often is raised or lowered that can kind of signal to other birds what their state might be. Oh, sorry. They are also sexually monomorphic. So one of the things that can be challenging is, trying to figure out which of the pair, if you see them around, is a male and a female. And often you have to rely on behavioral cues about which one that might be. They're pretty big bird. So if you've not had a chance to see one up close, they are actually a pretty good size, nearly 2 feet long from the tip of the bill to the tip of the tail. And they have this what I think is really beautiful plumage. And first glance, it looks like it's just kind of mottled brown and white, but it has a lot of metallic tones and colors to it, or what we refer to as iridescence. So fun little sidebar about iridescence. This is not actually a color that comes from pigment. It's what we refer to as a structural color. So what's actually happening on those feathers that have that iridescence is there's a layer of tiny air bubbles on the surface of the feather. And depending on how the light strikes that surface, it's refracted in different ways through those air bubbles. And what you see then can vary depending on the angle and the light, which you can kind of see here in these photos. So I think another cool thing about roadrunners is that they often don't sound quite like we think a bird would. So for sure, they do not, we're going to just get this out of the way right now up front. They do not say beep beep. For anyone who is deeply disappointed, terribly sorry, no beep beep. But they do have a really very cool array of calls. So the first one we're going to listen to is what's referred to as the coo call. So this is typically 3 to 8 kind of lower frequency down slurring coos that are given by the male. And typically if you're hearing this, the bird is going to be relatively close to you. And so let's get that to play. So I've often heard this described by people as sounding like a very sad puppy, or what it sounds like to me is sometimes like you've got your little wind-up Roadrunner toy and you've wound him up and he starts off strong and then it kind of tails off towards the end. So the next call is typically given by the female. This is what's referred to as the bark call, and this often sounds like coyote yelps. So this may be one of those sounds that you don't necessarily think of as coming from a bird. So that's the bark call. And then the last sound that they make is called a bill rattle. That's literally what it sounds like. And it's a sound that's given by both sexes. But definitely not something that you necessarily think of as perhaps a bird sound. So when listening for roadrunners, it pays to review some of your calls, and think outside the box. So where are you likely to find roadrunners? So they're typically associated with arid to semi-arid open country that has roughly about 50% scrub cover, usually with 2 to 3 meter tall brush. Now, of course, your mileage will vary depending on where you are in the range of the roadrunner. In Texas, they're most frequently found in mesquite scrub or juniper savanna, chaparral, riparian woodlands, and canyonlands. And here you can see some examples of these different places that roadrunners have been seen. So we're going to try something here on the next slide. We're going to see if I can make poll questions work or if I'm about to break TMN Tuesday. We'll give it a shot. So myth or fact, roadrunners are so adaptable that they can persist in any setting. Let me see if I can get this to open up here. All right. If this works, oh good, okay, I see people answering. So polls open for just a short period of time. So what do you think? Myth or fact? Any setting? Okay, still got votes coming in. Okay, time's almost up. Okay, so let's see what y'all thought. Okay, hopefully you're able to see the results of the poll now. Fingers crossed. And survey says, oh, it's actually a myth. So roadrunners are very adaptable, but they do kind of hit the wall when they hit certain types of habitat. So we can find them across their range getting into low density development and farmland, but generally once you hit really heavy urbanization or dense forest or woodland that has like a really thick understory and just a lot of it, you tend to not see them as frequently in those areas. That kind of is a bit of the limit that delineates what is going to be acceptable habitat for them. So roadrunners really are truly adapted to arid habitats, and they have several different adaptations that allow them to thrive in very dry habitats. They're capable of reabsorbing water via their excretory system. They can take advantage of these wide open areas and reach running speeds that cap off at about 20 miles an hour. The regular pace is about 15 miles an hour, which is the pace of a 4-mile minute. So I feel deeply ashamed now thinking about that. But this allows them to both go after the prey that they like to forage on, and then also gives them a bit of an edge when it comes to evading predators. So arid habitats often very hot during the day, and they have several adaptations to allow them to cope with this. So one of the things that you'll often see roadrunners doing on a hot day, they may cool themselves by fluttering this throat area, and we call that gular fluttering. They may also pant, or you may see them may look a little surprised to you, with their mouth open, staring straight ahead, hopefully into a nice good breeze. And we call that gaping. And so when they're doing that, they're actually allowing the air to move over these tissues that will allow for evaporative cooling. They also have an adaptation to keep their brain cooler. They have countercurrent blood flow, which is basically where your veins and your arteries sit close to each other, and that helps moderate that body temperature in and around their brain and their facial area. So this is the thing that in birds, we often think of as being on the extremities. So for example, on the legs or feet of birds, but here in the roadrunner, they actually have this countercurrent flow in their facial area. And another adaptation that we think of as not really being associated with birds on land, but more so with birds that spend a lot of time near saltwater out in the open ocean, roadrunners, like some of those birds, have nasal glands that can excrete salt. And so again, this is another adaptation to be able to conserve the body's water. So that said, roadrunners do drink. They will definitely appreciate a water source out on the landscape. But water is for drinking and dust is for bathing. So it's a lot of fun to watch them when they find a little patch that they can get into and take a good dust bath for themselves. And you will often find them lurking around water, not only for themselves and the ability to drink it, but also because so many of the things that they like to eat will come in for some water. So much for the daytime, hot temperatures, but then another thing that often happens in these arid habitats is that the temperature will just plummet overnight. And roadrunners are able to flex with that as well. So they can actually go into a state of torpor and drop their body temperature by as much as 6 degrees Fahrenheit at night in order to save energy. So the following morning, what you may often see them doing as the sun is just coming up is orienting themselves with their back to the sun, and they'll kind of fluff up these feathers so that the dark down on their back is exposed, and that's kind of a way for them to sunbathe, collect some of that radiant heat from the sun as it's rising, and give themselves a jump start for the day. So another myth or fact, and let me get this one queued up here. Roadrunners can safely eat venomous prey like wasps, centipedes, and scorpions. What do you think? Myth or fact? Okay, response is coming in. Okay, about 10 seconds left. All right. Let's see what y'all thought of this. Okay, so most of you said that you think this is a fact. And it is. They are pretty remarkable in what they can eat. So what do roadrunners eat? Everything. Pretty much if it can't get away from them, it's fair game. That said, the breakdown of what they tend to eat is about 90% animal matter and about 10% plant material. So when it comes to animals, again, if they can catch it and subdue it and swallow it down, it's generally going to be fair game. So everything from insects to spiders, scorpions, centipedes, millipedes, lizards, small snakes, adult birds, young birds, eggs, rodents, frogs, carrion, you name it, they will eat it. They will also eat, again, some different types of plant material if the need arises and as the opportunity arises. So just a sampling here of all the different things that they have. Often they're very efficient, will go for more than one thing at a time. They will even attempt things that are a good deal of the majority of their own body size. So you see here one that's trying to get itself a meadowlark and another that's managed or that is trying to process whether it caught it or whether it found it, a white-winged dove. They're pretty amazing in what they can prey. Now, you know, there are limits, but you do kind of get the sense that this is a little velociraptor out there running around, and that it's like, if I could do it, I would. So what do they mostly eat though? There's a lot of rumors and various kinds of information that are floating out around there. We'll get to that a little bit later, but really the analysis of what they tend to eat is that a lot of it is going to be invertebrate prey, which makes sense when you think about how much invertebrate life there is out there. So this is a picture of a postmortem gut analysis that was done on a roadrunner that was found deceased. And you can see that pretty much everything that was inside of its stomach at the time that it was killed is invertebrate, including a pretty gnarly looking centipede there. So that must have been fun watching that go down its gullet. Now that said, there is some finesse that takes place here. So if you're going for larger prey, the general way to handle this if you're a roadrunner is to incapacitate and or kill it by slamming it repeatedly against a hard surface. Very solid technique. This is also thought to perhaps help tenderize the prey and make it a little bit easier to swallow. Now, if you're adventuresome and you're going out to get yourself a horned lizard, you have to be pretty careful about how you swallow that. You think about what a horned lizard looks like and all those little projections on them. They have a strategy for that too. So they will turn the horned lizard around and swallow it head first, dorsal side up, to try and avoid injury to their digestive system from those little horns. And when they go for prickly fruit, such as tasajillo or prickly pear fruits, they'll actually knock those fruits off the plant and roll them around on the ground to remove those spines to lessen, again, the risk of injury as they're trying to eat them. So let's get to one of the big things here that's floating out around there. Roadrunners can even kill and eat rattlesnakes. Myth or fact? What do y'all think? Let me open up the poll here. Okay, answers still coming in. Got about 20 seconds if you're still on the fence about this one. All right. And survey says most of you believe that this is a fact, and it is. Very, very impressive to watch them go and do this. So sometimes what you'll actually see is a pair of roadrunners working in tandem to subdue a rattlesnake. So the challenge with the rattlesnake is that it will often try and coil itself around its head to protect it. So what the roadrunners will often do is make these forays, these little sallies at it to try and get it to strike. And then when the head comes out, that's when they try the preferred strategy, grab the head, and then as you saw in the video, smash the snot out of it on whatever hard surface you can find, and then pop it down the hatch. So really solid, savvy predator. Now, what eats roadrunners? So there are a variety of different wildlife out there that may try and prey on a roadrunner. Most predation, as with most birds, the highest risk is at the egg or nestling stage when you're young and inexperienced and vulnerable. And so very frequently we have eggs or nestlings that are often taken by coyotes, raccoons, skunks, rat snakes, coach whips, bull snakes, and then sometimes also corvids and other raptors. So adults may be also hunted by red-tailed hawks or Cooper's hawks. So, you know, it's a risky world out there for them as well. So let's just talk about another question here that often comes up. Adult roadrunners are so fast that no mammalian predators in their habitat can catch them. What do you think? Let me pull this one up here. And we'll talk about the coyote in the room, so to speak. All right, and I will insist that nobody, there's, still answers coming in. Please give us your best answer. No going to YouTube and looking up Warner Brothers clips. No cheating on this one. Okay, a few seconds left. Okay. So most of you thought this was a myth, and that is in fact a myth. So roadrunners can top out at about 20 miles an hour in a dead sprint. It's still not going to be fast enough for them to outrun a coyote, which can reach up to 43 miles per hour. So one of the things that a roadrunner will try to do, and this again is thinking about that habitat and why it's so important to a roadrunner to be in that setting, when it's out in those open areas, foraging for its own prey, having that shrub cover nearby where it can escape and get to safety is going to be very, very important. So if you get an early look at a predator that's stalking you or chasing after you, and you can get yourself into cover, you very well might escape. They're not really strong flyers. Again, most of the locomotion that takes place with roadrunners is going to be on the ground. So they're going to be trying to get up and out of the way. So that said, let's talk a little bit about family life. So roadrunners hold a territory year-round. You have a mated pair that has a kind of often have an interesting behavior. It's a little bit like, I guess, having the thing where people talk about having two duvet covers on the bed so nobody has to fight over the sheets. They'll often split the territory during the non-breeding season and have areas that they each tend to use a little bit more. But if you get the chance to observe a roadrunner pair, they have got some spectacular courtship displays. Like they know how to dial it up to 11. So we're watching a male here doing the tail wag display for his mate or his prospective mate. He's really putting on a good show. He's determined that she is going to pay attention to this, get a good look. And if she finds his display to be suitable, then mating takes things up to another notch. She is not just content to have a mating process here. She needs a gift. So what you'll typically see with a roadrunner pair, and they can be quite cooperative and spend quite a good amount of time in the act of mating, is the male will bring her, he better bring her a nuptial gift. So often this will be something a little bit smaller, maybe not as dramatic as the snake in this picture here, maybe a grasshopper or something like that. But this fellow has really found a nice nuptial gift, a good, robust snake. So things are looking up. So let's talk about another question here, and some of you may have an inside track onto this one. Unlike many other cuckoos, roadrunners raise their own young. True or false? And I'm going to pull that one up. There you go. Okay, answers still coming in. We got about 10 seconds left on this one. Okay, so most of you thought this was true, and it is in fact a fact. So this is a lot of really fascinating behavior to be able to watch if you have the opportunity to spy in a little bit on your roadrunner neighbors if they happen to have a nest somewhere nearby where you work or live. So in Texas, the breeding season tends to run from early March through late October. So if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of the year, it is a very long window for the breeding season. So the other thing that's fascinating about these guys, unlike a lot of other birds, is sometimes you'll have birds that will, if something happens to the nest early in the season, they'll attempt another brood. They'll try and re-nest. But there are fewer species that will go on to raise maybe 2 broods if the conditions are right. Roadrunners can nest up to 3 times during a season and raise 3 broods, but the conditions have to be really, really good. So nests are typically placed about 1 to 3 meters off the ground in isolated thickets of small trees or shrubs, and they're typically going to be somewhere in proximity to an open grassy area with short vegetation, which is again where most of that foraging behavior is taking place. So you got a bunch of hungry babies, very important that you're able to provision them properly. So you can find nests in everything from hackberries to honey mesquite, sumacs. In this case here, this nest has been tucked into a cactus. So a little bit of behavior to perhaps help you figure out who might be who. Males will often deliver building materials for the nest to the female. She is the one who usually will construct them and add those materials into the nest itself. So typically a clutch will involve 3 to 6 eggs. It will tend towards the higher end when there's more food out there on the landscape, and these eggs are laid every other day. So we had the question about brood parasitism, and that answer is correct. They raise their own young, but there have been some interesting observations of nests that have been found with up to 12 eggs in them. And there's some suspicion that this might be due to intraspecific nest parasitism, where there's a pair and another female comes in and just plops a few extra eggs into this nest and has maybe the neighbors help raise her young. So another interesting thing here, both parents will incubate on the nest, but again, little piece of interesting behavior here, typically only the male is going to be incubating at night. So again, think about these arid habitats where the temperature is really falling at night. So that incubation process is a lot more energetically expensive. The males are the ones who carry the larger fat deposits. So he's got a little extra oomph to get him and the nest through the night. So by 16 days post-hatching, young roadrunners can fully run. They begin to exhibit some of these tail bobbing and crest raising behaviors. They can pick up and swallow their own food, which, as we all know, doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to pester their parents for food. They'll typically fledge or leave the nest at about 15 to 25 days old. Now, another interesting thing to think about, if you have a nest nearby and you see a kind of gangly looking, awkward, very young looking roadrunner who's not in the nest, and maybe it's the only bird and you're concerned that it's fallen out of the nest or maybe it's been abandoned, pay close attention and just keep watch to see if an adult tends to it before thinking about reaching out for a rehabilitator or something. So what will often happen, you may have a young bird that fledges early from the nest. Typically, the adults will lead it to cover and then they will continue to care for it, even though it is out of the nest. So they'll be bringing food to the nest. They'll also continue to feed this youngster who's gotten a little precocious and hopped out a little bit early. So typically, these youngsters will become independent of their parents 30 to 40 days after they leave the nest. So how are these guys doing? So this is one of those times when I get very excited to talk about the conservation status of a bird, because it's actually doing reasonably well. Unlike so many of the other bird species that we know and love, and many of the ones that are the focus of the work that I do. So the global population is estimated to be about 1.4 million birds. The long-term population, long-term trend for population over the last 50 years suggests that they are doing pretty well. They're fairly stable. There are some areas where we see some declines. So for example, California, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later when we talk about what they need. The numbers will often go up and down in parts of the range. So you see Louisiana going down. That's really starting to push pretty far east. So if conditions are right, they may flex, into some of these areas. And then if conditions become less favorable, they may, those populations may decrease and retract along the edges of the range. So the Christmas bird count and the breeding bird survey both show modest increases. You'll see, as with many species, that they tend to have these patterns where they go up and down in population across their range. But what's really interesting to think about for us here in Texas is that depending on where you're getting your numbers from, we host roughly 20 to 33% of the global population here within our state, which is pretty exciting, and also gives us some reason to think about our stewardship for this bird. So what are some of the things that are threats to the greater roadrunner? So again, we mentioned that they can be generally impacted by urbanization that leads to less suitable habitat. This is one of the things that is thought to be driving some of the general decline out in California, as a lot of that habitat is encroached on by urbanization. So you have increased vehicular and human and pet activity that can reduce the quality of the habitat. You also have basic changes to vegetation structure. So as we mentioned earlier, you may see roadrunners persisting in suburban areas, but one of the key things that's going to be necessary is having that native shrub vegetation and also then the structure that's suitable. So having those native shrubs in proximity to some of that more open short grass foraging habitat. So if you have been really, really up close to your roadrunner, the odds are good that it was unfortunately because you found it as a roadkill, as many of us do. So again, with a species that spends so much of its time running around on the ground in order to forage, the other thing that comes into play here is you think about a typical roadway and the way that the vegetation is structured. So in a lot of the areas that are prime habitat for these guys, as soon as you get to a roadway, it's much more open right along the sides of the road. Maybe there's some shrubs that are 20 or so feet off the roadway, but that area right along the edge of the road is going to be prime. Also, if you are into lizards or snakes or things like that that like to come out onto warm asphalt, that can also draw predators like roadrunners into this high-risk area. So we do find that they are subject to collision from vehicles. Another thing that's interesting that's popped up in some of the research literature when it comes to collisions is that they have been also documented as mortalities in the desert Southwest at solar installations. And interestingly, it's not so much to do with the panels, it's the fencing around these areas. And some of the supposition is that they may become entangled in some types of fencing, or they may be trying to flee from a predator and somehow become caught or collide with that fencing material. So another thing that we need to be mindful of with greater roadrunners, again, thinking about how diverse and broad their diet is, they are subject to exposure to potential pesticides that are out on the landscape. So there have been studies that have been done in California and in Texas looking at DDT and the breakdown product from DDT, DDE. And in California, the study that looked at that there actually found those chemicals in the tissues of Roadrunner, and they have also documented accumulations of those products in prey items in Texas. So again, this DDT is not a chemical that is used anymore in the United States, but as an example of something that was studied, we know that these types of chemicals can get into the food web and that they can bioaccumulate, as we've seen in other species of birds. So the risk is there in thinking about what might be happening. The other thing that happens with pesticides is they take away the prey base. So they may not necessarily have a physical impact on the Roadrunner, but if you take away all of those invertebrates, you've taken away a huge amount of their food. You take away those rodents, you've taken away a lot of high value food as well. So let's get to one of the ones here that's can be a little bit controversial. Roadrunners are major predators of quail. Let's pop this one up here and see what people think. All right, are they eating all the quail? Is this what's driving the quail down? Okay, let's see what y'all thought. There we go. Okay. So based on research, this is actually a myth. So one of the other threats that roadrunners still face today, even though they are a protected species, they are a native bird species to North America and therefore protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is a federal law. They are also protected under Texas Parks and Wildlife Code. They are often blamed for declines in quail. So we've kind of established that these guys are opportunists. They will eat just about anything. That said, are they the thing that is going after all the quail? Is most of their diet quail? And the answer from comprehensive feeding studies is no. Again, they will be taking advantage of whatever they can get, but the vast majority of their diet is not coming from our quail, and they are not the thing that is driving quail populations into the ground in some places. So a lot of what they are eating, though, again, thinking about what do we consider grasshoppers to be? What do we consider rodents to be? They are crop and household pest control right here. So again, in spite of a lot of this information that's out there and trying to dispel some of these myths, there are still cases where these birds are subject to human persecution and even in some cases shot illegally. But that said, if you're breeding quail, keep an eye on them when they're young. The other thing that's so fascinating, besides just the biology of the species, is how incredibly important and embedded in North American culture it is. It has so many different connections to both tradition and modern culture. So the Greater Roadrunner is present in many Native American stories and traditions. It is associated with courage and strength and endurance. Of the various names that are out there in Native American languages for this bird, when you translate them to English, some of the names translate to warbird or snake eater or medicine bird. We have names for this bird in Spanish, El Correcaminos or El Paisano, And then there are even other kind of, I guess I would call them off-brand names in English that we have for the greater roadrunner, like the ground cuckoo or the chaparral cock. And this relationship goes way, way back. So they have been depicted in petroglyphs. So you can actually go out to some of these archaeological sites and view these petroglyphs for yourself. You can find examples of roadrunners in petroglyph art in the Llano Estacado and southern New Mexico. And one example of, I think, just a really beautiful tradition is the Pueblo peoples will use the symbol of an X to symbolize the roadrunner track, which is essentially the footprint that it leaves, to ward off evil. And by placing these roadrunner track symbols around a home of someone who's deceased, it confuses the evil spirits about which direction, which path the soul of the departed has taken. So it's kind of a, you know, watching over and a kind of a benediction, if you will. European American settlers believed that if somebody was lost, you could follow a roadrunner and that would lead you back to a trail. So if you think again, we think about some of the ways that roadrunners forage. While on the surface, this sounds like it might kind of just be, you know, who knows? It may not be that far from accurate in some cases if you are looking for a more open area where you might be able to pick up the trail that you lost. And our fascination and our love of roadrunners continues into contemporary culture. We all know this fellow right here. But I might recommend a little bit of work needs to be done here. As a scientist, this gives me a little bit of heartburn. So they got the general body shape right. There's the long tail. I don't know what's happening with this plumage color. It's different. Same thing with the bill. I don't know what happened there. That was, I guess they thought it was more friendly. Again, the feet, we're just going to go with maybe those are zygodactyl toes, if we're lucky, maybe, hopefully. And it runs. So they got that part. That's good. Progress, right? We had another attempt at a depiction of the roadrunner in contemporary culture, the 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner Superbird. This one got the decurved bill a little bit more accurately than the Warner Brothers depiction. It did again capture the long tail. The color is still wrong. Now, I'm just saying, if they made this thing iridescent, I would be all over this. I mean, this is the car that you probably want to take to whatever your unnamed big box bulk buying experience is. You load that thing up, just like a Roadrunner, you get all the things, drive your little iridescent Plymouth Roadrunner home. I'm there. Make it happen. So New Mexico got to have the Roadrunner as its state bird. They adopted that in March of 1949. And again, an example here from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I think this is amazing. It's a big, giant, beautiful sculpture. It's giving Godzilla energy, which I think is so accurate for this bird. You got to lean into it. And the little clip of song that we heard earlier is a clip from the song Roadrunner by Bo Diddley. And it does in fact feature the beep beep. So we get that in there. But it really kind of, again, captures that idea of the Roadrunner constantly on the move. And just more recently, we had a Roadrunner in his very, very short, brief life, make the national news. So this little fella here was named Miles, and there was a gentleman who was clearing some land near Odessa, and he accidentally ran over a bird's nest, and there was one egg left, and so he rescued it and drove it 500 miles back home to Lufkin, and shortly thereafter, the egg hatched. And so then he and his wife were unsure of exactly what to do with this new hatchling. And they reached out to the Rogers Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, which is in Dallas. area and then drove another 160 miles to get this little guy to a place where he could receive care. So unfortunately, Miles, as often happens with many hatchling birds, failed to thrive. And so he died a few days later, but the level of care and importance for this one little bird, the impact that this had on people was so powerful that people would do this. It just goes to show how deeply connected we are to birds and another intersection that we have with nature and how important it is in our lives. So this is the part where I go into shameless lobbying. So here we have our Texas Master Naturalist logo, which is beautiful, very suitable, beautiful, but I'm going to recommend that we go with a real Texas Master Naturalist icon and consider, if I may, propose thinking about, maybe an alternative logo with the Roadrunner here. So Roadrunners, Master Naturalists, you share so many things in common. You embody courage. No challenge is too daunting for you. You embody strength. You are tireless in doing the hard work to get the job done, whatever it takes. You display endurance. You're dynamic and always on the move. Sometimes we don't know which way you're coming and going, but there's always something awesome happening. And you show perseverance. You are ready to face those obstacles head on in service to our communities, which we appreciate so, so very much. And you show this amazing teamwork and loyalty to the Master Naturalist mission. So just putting that out there, propose that maybe we think about sharing a little logo space here with the Greater Roadrunner. So that said, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what we can do for Roadrunners where we live and work. So just like every other organism that's out there, they have some basic needs: food, water, shelter, space, and safety. So when we're talking about providing that food, that shelter, the baseline for everything, this comes down to getting those native plants out on the landscape. So wherever you are in the state, whether that's in the Trans-Pecos, whether that's in South Texas, whether that's in Central Texas, thinking about what those native shrubs are that can provide that structure that they're really looking for, that provides not only the space for the Roadrunner, but also the things that their prey need as well. So this is kind of our gold standard. They will appreciate some water. So if you have a drip or bubbler or guzzler, a shallow basin, anything like that, they'll take advantage of it. Just keep it clean. And when it comes to thinking about how we arrange space, cultivating and protecting this mid-story native shrub and cacti for cover and nesting is going to be really important. So we want to, again, have these open areas of low-growing native vegetation where they can forage, the shrubs where they can nest. And remember, again, that Roadrunners are territorial and they will stay in the same area year-round if the habitat is right. So protecting open space in and around urban areas is going to be important. So we had a question actually at the annual meeting about what their average territory size is. And what I was able to find, it of course varies a little bit, but that generally speaking, if you think about kind of an area with a given diameter, it's going to range anywhere from about 0.7 kilometers up to 1 kilometer. So that's kind of what you would think of as the space that a pair will need. So depending on, again, how many birds you want to have in that population, you got to go up from there. So again, thinking about the safety, not only of Roadrunners, but everything else that shares their habitat. Reducing the use of pesticides through integrated pest management rather than relying on chemical pesticides. This has benefits for everything out there. And just remember, Roadrunners are pest control. So they, again, can be very fast and agile, but they may, especially young birds, still be at risk from predation from feral and free roaming cats. So another thing we can do is keep our cats indoors or construct them some fabulous cat patio, where they can avail themselves of some sun and the breezes. But again, this is not only good for roadrunners, but for other native wildlife as well. And then thinking strategically too, we can also think about the benefit that wildlife over or underpasses along major roadways might have for roadrunners, in addition to the species that we typically build them for. So we may think of these as being things that we might build in South Texas to benefit an ocelot, or in the Western United States to let herds of elk cross a highway safely. But we also have these smaller creatures as well, like roadrunners, that may benefit from this as well. And so one of the things that everybody can do if you encounter a roadrunner is think about your options for documenting them for stewardship and science. So there's a variety of different projects that are out there that give you an opportunity to log your observations of roadrunners. And one of the things that I always find really interesting when I go in and research different bird species is sometimes it's the more common species where we assume that we should know a lot about them, that we often have some pretty glaring gaps in information for. And community or citizen science can help us fill those information gaps of some of the things that we just take for granted. So whether that is a seasonal project like the Christmas bird count or the breeding bird survey, making sure that you put in your checklist if you've been out on a walk for eBird, or logging the interactions that you see. So many of the pictures that are in this PowerPoint came from iNaturalist and the things that people had documented. So getting a sense of what are they eating, how are they interacting with their environment, a lot of different options. So in closing, I would just like to encourage you guys, 2025 Texas Master Naturalist, get out there and show us all your Greater Roadrunner spirit. And with that, I am happy to take any questions if we have a little bit of time. Oh, actually, it looks like we're at time, but.
We are absolutely at time, Tania, and there are
Okay.
a ton of questions.
Oh dear.
Do you have just a few minutes? Are you
I
willing
do.
to answer
Yep.
4 or 5? Okay, we won't inundate you because there are more than 4 or 5 questions in here. But really well done, and I'm gonna have to scroll up above all of the thanks and wonderfuls to find some of the questions that were asked earlier. There was a few questions back and forth about one of your early comments on parasitism. Can you explain why and kind of the definition behind how roadrunners fit that terminology there?
Oh, sure. Okay, so nest parasitism. So backing this up for anybody who's not a bird person necessarily, I mean, it surprises me that y'all are out there, but that's okay. We are always bringing you into Team Bird if you're not. So nest parasitism is a strategy that some species of birds have adopted where they will mate. The females will basically get those eggs ready, but rather than building their own nest, they will find somebody else, often another species, to be the parents that actually raise the young. So one of our most infamous that we have here in Texas is the brown-headed cowbird. So you see those guys all over the place. Those females are constantly scanning during the breeding season, looking for some hapless nest where they can quickly get in, drop an egg or two, and get out. So what'll often happen is those the eggs of the nest parasite hatch more quickly, their young are bigger, their young are louder, and it's kind of preying on this instinct to feed a hungry mouth with the parents. So often what'll happen is it's to the detriment of the host birds, the host species. So with roadrunners, they don't seem to be, again, this is one of those places where there needs to be I need to do a little bit more digging and see how much literature there actually is out there on this. But again, we're finding these nests where there's a bunch of eggs. The suspicion is that it's not coming from one female. That's a lot of eggs for one female to lay, that it may be another female coming in and taking advantage of an unattended nest and dropping her eggs in another roadrunner female. So it's not happening between species. It's all happening within the same species, but the premise is still the same. You're still kind of cheating the system a little.
I had another question that I thought was really interesting early on, when you asked us about rattlesnakes and their ability to eat rattlesnakes, or if they did, and the poll on that. Michelle Lopez asked, how long do you think it takes them to digest a rattlesnake?
Oh, that's a
Random
really
question.
good question. I don't know.
You'd have to sit and
That's,
watch one at some point.
I mean, certainly you saw how quickly that one went down the hatch, although I will say that it's not uncommon for people to watch roadrunners eat prey and you'll still see a tail of something hanging out of the mouth as they're stalking the next thing. So
Tanya, there's a few questions in the chat asking about their susceptibility to bird flu, avian bird flu. Do we know anything
that's a
about that yet?
great question. I don't know specifically about roadrunners. That would be a place where to probably get an answer on that, and this is something if you're really curious about this, the USDA has a list where they have compiled any bird species that has tested positive, that has actually gone through, had samples submitted to a clinical test. And there's a lot of species on that list. That said, the current form of avian influenza that we're seeing out there, the highly pathogenic avian influenza that's circulating right now, really seems to be hitting our water birds, so ducks, geese, other water associated birds, shorebirds, things like terns and whatnot. And then the next group that really seems to be impacted are raptors, especially ones that prey on those kinds of birds. So there's some supposition that as they're preying, for example, an eagle, bald eagle finds a dead duck and eats it or brings it back to the nest, that it may be carrying such a high viral load that it then infects the bird that's eating it. And in fact, I just got a very sad text message from my mom, who likes to watch the eagle cams out in Florida, that her favorite pair actually just lost their brood because there's some supposition that they died from avian influenza. So one of the things that does not appear to be supported yet by testing, and again, it's all difficult with reliant on the samples that come in, we are not seeing the same patterns in land birds, that includes a roadrunner, as we are in these water birds and waterfowl. So, and that's the story is unfolding. So stay tuned.
Lots of questions in the chat about whether or not roadrunners mate for life.
Yes, they do actually, or as close to it as you always have to put an asterisk next to bird monogamy. It's about as close as you're going to get. So yes, they will stay paired together for a very long time. Sometimes it may be for the life of the bird, or it may be for very, very many seasons. But yes, that is kind of the typical pattern.
I'm not seeing a ton of other questions. At least at the bottom of the chat, there's a very large section of the chat that's all about the thanks and kudos and wonderful presentation. One of the best presentations I've ever seen. I learned so much about roadrunners today. A lot of that, Tanya, I encourage you to copy those and hold on to those. Big kudos for your presentation today. Actually, there are two more questions if you're willing to answer just two more questions real fast. Will a roadrunner feed on carcass like roadkill?
Yes.
And will they hunt at night?
Ooh, that's a good question. They are primarily diurnal. I don't know if when you have maybe a full moon, if that might be a bit of an exception. Again, if you guys see this, document it.
Yeah.
Upload it to iNaturalist. Give us a little data to go on there.
That's
So
a wonderful way to exit as a way for our master naturalists to go out and to study their behavior some more, provide some more data. for our state's biologists and for research in the future. Tania, thank you so very much for your presentation today. All right, and with that, thank y'all, and we'll see you at the next TMN Tuesday in early